Hi, thanks for stopping by again. I've got a little story I'd like to tell you today about my fourth great grandmother, and her name was Elizabeth McBride. That was her maiden name. And I guess don't really have a story to tell you about her life, but I'd like to share an incident dealing with Elizabeth McBride that I found to be quite interesting. And I think, if nothing else, it shows a little bit about the importance that Heavenly Father places in family history work. And the story is about her that I'd like to tell you about. This story actually was recorded in the church news on 26 October 2002. And I believe it's on page 16. Actually, you can go into the archives of the church news and you can find this story recorded there. And I want to thank, I believe it's one of my cousins who wrote the story. Her name was Eunice Tidwell Merrill. And when she wrote the story, she claimed that my fourth great grandmother, Elizabeth McBride, was her second great grandmother. And so Eunice and I are somehow cousins. And I thank her for recording this story, and thought it was pretty cool that it wound up in the church news. Excuse me. So I want to share that with you. The story starts out where my cousin, and again, I don't know the exact relationship, but Eunice Tidwell Merrill and her husband were working on a 5-generation chart with pictures and locations of family grave markers of direct line descendants. And while they were working on this, they found out that there were 5 pioneer ancestors. All 5 of them were women and wives of the pioneers that had no grave markers. And so what they did is they started to solicit funds from family members so that they could get the costs needed to provide these markers for these pioneer ancestors, these women who had sacrificed so much to give them a marker. The very last person that they dealt with was Elizabeth McBride Tidwell, and that is my fourth great grandmother. Okay, so for those of you counting, great 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 grandmother. And she was the wife of Absalom Tidwell. And Absalom was actually, he died and was buried in the old Nauvoo burial ground. And Eunice, cousin Eunice, was able to track down and found that there was a Deseret News article written in November of 1894 that indicated that Elizabeth actually went on to Utah and she died there and was buried in Salinas, Utah. Salina, I think, is how it is pronounced, and if that is wrong, I apologize. But she died and is buried in Salina, Utah. And so cousin Eunice sent her sister and her husband down to Salina to be able to take a picture of great-grandma Elizabeth McBride's headstone. Well, they couldn't find it. They searched all around in Salina and all of the cemeteries, no headstone to be found. So cousin Eunice says she checked with the church's, the IGI, the International Geological Index, and found a person who had submitted some information on great-grandma Elizabeth and was able to contact this distant relative, and her name was Marjorie Jensen, and she was living in Salina. And so cousin Eunice wrote to Marjorie and asked if she would be willing to go out to the cemetery and take a picture of this grandma Elizabeth's marker. Marjorie couldn't find it. She had been decorating graves for many years, but she hadn't noticed that there was an absence of a marker for Elizabeth McBride. So she did some work, checked with the city, and based on the Deseret News article that she had actually died and was buried in Salina, they gave permission for a marker to be set up. So money was collected and a marker purchased. Now, let me just jump ahead with the story just a little bit. The reason that there was no record of great-grandmother Elizabeth McBride's marker was because the records for the cemetery did not start until the year 1903. They called it the sexton's office, and the sexton's office didn't start until 1903, whereas great-grandma Elizabeth McBride passed away in 1894. And that is why there was no records kept, there was no indication of a marker, and just over the course of time, things had been lost. Okay, so let's jump ahead. Let's go back now. They were given permission and raised the funds, and in October of 2002, cousin Eunice received a letter from Marjorie and explained what happened when Marjorie, took her two grandsons to watch the placement of the marker that had been purchased for great-grandma Elizabeth McBride's burial place. She said, Marjorie picked out a spot where she felt it should be placed. One grandson started to dig in that spot when he felt something under the grass and dirt. There they found a small metal plate buried just 2 inches under grass and dirt with the name Elizabeth Tidwell. The Lord knew, and this is what she said in the letter, the Lord knew and guided Marjorie to the exact spot where Elizabeth was buried 108 years ago. Goes on to say Marjorie had been to there a couple of times and always had felt drawn to that spot. And I think that's kind of a neat story. So like I said, that account is found in the Church News, October 26th of 2002. But I think it gives a good indication of just how important it is, one, for keeping records, and number two, that it was important that she be recognized for the sacrifice of the pioneered heritage and all that she had done to bring her family out to Utah. To be recognized, the Lord saw fit that it would be appropriate to place that marker in the exact spot where she was. And I just thought that was kind of an interesting story that I wanted to share with you. So I thank Marjorie Jensen and I thank Cousin Eunice for sharing that. And thank you for stopping by. We'll see you next time.